Everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you here today with an article from PJ Media. It's a bit of a long one, and it is part one of at least two from what I know of. It is called The Decline and Fall of Home, Part One. And I did read that as Rome about the first four times I looked at the title. So I just noticed right before I started recording that it actually says home. But the article is a comparison, of course. A lot of people have been making this comparison about the United States and the Roman Empire, and about are we the Roman Empire at this point? So when I looked at this article, I was kind of like, you know what? I think this is be an interesting thing to talk about. So, like I said, this is part one. I'm recording this probably at least a week before it's actually going to be put out. And the second part isn't even out yet. It does say at the very bottom that it's not going to be released till October 1st. I'm recording this on September 30th right now. So the second part I will record tomorrow, I guess would be October 1st. From again when I'm recording this, not when it actually premieres. But it is a long one, so you're going to strap yourselves in. I just thought this was really interesting to go through. So let's go through it. So again, it's The Decline and Fall of Home from PJ Media, dated September 25th. And this is actually, was that last Monday, was actually when this came out. So here is a wonderful picture. I think everybody's probably seen this at some point. I believe this is the sack of Rome or one of them. I don't know which one off the top of my head, but there were a few. Anyway, get into the article. Starts with a quote from the Satyricon written by Petronius, who was a around at the time of Emperor Nero, the dude who supposedly played the fiddle while Rome was burning. And the quote here says, "See everywhere prosperity raging to its ruin." And if Petronius was in fact the author of it, because there's not absolutely 100% conclusive proof he was, but everyone kind of thinks, yeah, he probably was. Well, he saw Rome falling because of Emperor Nero right in front of his own two eyes. So he probably had a little bit of insight into that sort of thing. So the article says the similarities between the current American decline as a world power and the collapse of the Roman Empire have often been remarked. After the western part of the Roman Empire fell, the eastern half continued to exist as the Byzantine Empire for hundreds of years, almost just under 1,000 actually. Therefore, the fall of Rome really refers to only the fall of the western half of the empire. That's correct, and that was in 476 AD, which it says right down here. Says the analogy has become a staple cliche of popular opinion and historical scholarship. The correspondences between Rome and America are compelling, and when the issue is regarded with fresh eyes and attention to taxonomic detail, will strike us with a sense of genuine foreboding. And what's the quote I've heard said before? Like history doesn't repeat; it's another R word, and I don't remember it. Doesn't repeat. It ripples or something like that, or I don't know. Whatever. Someone smarter than me will find that out. This is the factors leading to the fall of the Roman Empire, which eventually dated around 476 AD, following the attack of the barbarian chieftain Odoacer, are early reminiscent of the nodal single-point failures observable in 2023 America. Briefly, first, the welfare state. So this is where we're going to start comparing America today to the actual Roman Empire. So starting in 123 BC, the powerful reformist tribune Gaius Gracchus installed a monthly free dole of grain and provided for the entertainment of a decadent citizenry. And poet Juvenal's phrase, it's probably pronounced Juvenal if it's Latin, but I'm going to say Juvenal because I don't actually know for sure. So in poet Juvenal's phrase from the Satires, the Satire 10, circa 127 AD, quote, they shed their sense of responsibility and reveal their desire for two things only, bread and circuses, end quote. The practice continued well into the later years of the empire, and the analogy with the American panoply of food stamps, great society amenities, payment to single mothers, provision of flat screen TVs and other luxury items, and the contribution of welfare expansion to family breakdown is stunning. And yeah, my thought, if we were to compare this to the Roman Empire, even though I think we have a much closer comparison to the Spanish Civil War, if we're talking historical comparisons to where America is now, um, at least in terms of where we are, like with a heightened political atmosphere. But if we're thinking about Rome, this is with the Grunke brothers was where I kind of thought we were at this point right now. And thankfully, if that's the case, I mean, there probably is time to reverse it if we learn anything from history, because from these guys until when the Republic became an empire was, or actually, let's go at least until Caesar was about 80 years. If we go to when Augustus turned into, or I'm sorry, Octavian turned into Augustus or became Augustus, which usually is the start of the empire at 27 AD. It's about 100 years, so there's time, but I'd say things are probably going to be a little different this time. I don't think we necessarily have the same amount of time. But anyway, let's keep going. So for debt, it says under the Emperor Diocletian, personal debt led to the abandonment of mortgage property. In our terms, the collapse of the subprime mortgage market. Yeah, I remember that. Enormous public debt crippled Rome's economy. America's debt, both funded and unfunded, hovers in the unimaginable trillions. As Will and Ariel Durant wrote of Rome in The Lessons of History, huge bureaucratic machinery was unable to govern the empire effectively with the enormous, out of control debt. So we're seeing the same disaster unfolding before our very eyes. Michael E. Newton warns in The Path to Tyranny by 2035, the debt is projected to be between 79 and 181% of GDP. The United States is clearly on the road to bankruptcy. Well, that's fun. Can't wait for that to happen. I mean, what did he say that was? By 2035? Well, hopefully I'm still alive then. I mean, because that's only 12 years from now. But at the same time, like, you never know. So taxes. As the tax rates rose gradually but insupportably upon Roman middle class or equites, farmers, small landholders, merchants, administrators, until economic productivity collapsed. To complicate matters, punitive taxes on the wealthy inevitably led to a flight of capital in Rome as well as the United States. As the burden will then fall, Newton writes, on the middle class, yay, that's probably most of us listening, who will also be forced to leave their holdings when their tax burden becomes unbearable. That this occurred in ancient Rome and could just as easily take place in the United States. And the policy regarding taxes in the early portion of the reign of Tiberius, as Suetonius reports in the 12 Caesars, namely, it is part of a good shepherd to shear his flocks, not skin them, soon came to be disregarded. Yeah, I can't wait for I like how Biden comes out. We're not taxing the middle class. Turns out, oh yeah, you are taxing the middle class, dumbass. Agriculture, it says, regulations around food production are among the most critical issues. Arthur Farrell writes in The Fall of the Roman Empire that the chief cause of the agricultural decline was high taxation on marginal land, driving it out of cultivation. In today's America, high taxes, along with political decisions resulting in spiraling inflation and a depreciating currency, are having the same effect. In countries like Holland and Canada, carbon and nitrogen taxes are having an increasingly damaging impact. In the US, fuel excise taxes are an implicit form of carbon pricing, covering 28.4% of emissions from 2021 with no let up in sight. Along with the reduction of chemical fertilizers, green pricing protocols and government mandates will further decimate the food supply. As the popular saying goes, no farmers, no food, and cricket mask is no substitute. Yeah, I can't wait until they start telling us to even more, like they start pushing on us, eat the bugs, and like you kind of don't have a choice about that, which you can tell they're already trying to do. So let's make sure that the farmers get what they need so that we don't need to eat that crap. So, outsourcing. So, supplementing the tax debacle, Rome's economy stagnated from a large trade deficit, especially as grain production was outsourced to Egypt. Yeah, I remember seeing a lot about that. So, in barbarian Europe, Gerald Simmons traces the effects of this imbalance. As conquerors in North Africa, the Vandals cut off the empire's grain supply at will. This created critical food shortages. And America's curtailing of its energy industry and reliance on the importation of foreign oil is vulnerable to similar threats and pressures, high costs, and potential scarcity of a crucial resource. Yeah, so when we have all these supplies here, or like these, oil is here in the United States, but we just don't want to mine for it because, oh God, there's a certain changing of the climate that people are more worried about. Well, this is what's going to happen. Open borders. Yep. This is one of the things I figured would pop up on here when I first read the article a week ago or so, whenever it came that day that it came out. And this is one of the things I always think of when I think about like how our country is comparable to the Roman Empire is the open borders thing. So let's see what it says. It says Rome was overwhelmed by a flood of illegal immigrants: Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Franks, Anglos, Saxons, Alemanni, Thuringians, Jutes, Picts, Burgundians, Alans, Vandals, and Lombards. And it did nothing, as the Durants wrote in their magisterial The Story of Civilization, Volume 3, to let assimilation catch up with infiltration. Although in the American context under a Democrat president and Senate, assimilation was never the goal. Yeah, I totally agree with that. We just want people here to do the work for us is basically what they're doing. Says millions of new and grateful Democrat voters were, and that's another thing. Says changing the demographic profile of the nation is the plan. Yep. Says no empire or country can survive indefinitely under such conditions. James O'Donnell points out in The Ruin of the Roman Empire that the barbarian invasions were not the decisive factor in the fall of Rome. Right, that's true. This is a common misconception. Rather, it all started with a refugee crisis. And this was the real invasion that unraveled the necessary thread of Roman rule. And they didn't have like a wall that they were really able to put up. I mean, of course, there's Hadrian's Wall at the north of Britain to keep the would have been the Picts at that time, not the Scots. They weren't the Scots yet, but there's no other walls around. I mean, they had troops stationed every so often, but like you could just kind of walk from one place to another and probably not even know you were in someone else's territory for the most part back then. So tyranny, and here's the fun part that everybody loves. So after Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC, the Roman Republic began to dissolve. 27 BC is the date assigned to the beginning of the Roman Empire, the subsequent principle of dynastic succession, and ultimately the rule of tyrants, many of whom were profoundly corrupt and some demonstrably unhinged. Definitely did not start with Augustus, but Tiberius wasn't too great, and then you had Caligula after him. If you don't know about Caligula, well, go look him up. And then Claudius was okay after him, and then you had Nero. So yeah, it's it started off with the exception of Augustus pretty rough. So it says Nero and Caligula are the usual villains in the popular mind, but one also thinks of emperors like the devious and narcissistic Elagabalus, whom Stephen Welton Tabor compares to Obama. I don't know a lot about that dude. I remember he was a kid. He was like a teenager when he ascended to the throne, and he was kind of the one that was, if I remember correctly, was like thought of himself as like a sun god, I think, and demanded that like everybody pay tribute to him as a sun god. And yeah, he was kind of a weird dude. So it says, in the devastating reign of the demented Commodus, who renamed Rome Colonia Lucia Ennia Commodiana. And I probably butchered that. But Commodus, if anybody's seen the movie Gladiator, he's the character Joaquin Phoenix plays, though he did not meet his end like he did in the movie. Gladiator's a great movie. I recommend anybody go see it, but it is definitely an alternate history things because his father, this Commodus's father, Marcus Aurelius, who Richard Harris plays in that movie, did not die the way he did in that movie either. And Commodus reigned for I think like 12 years before. I think it was like a wrestling partner of his ended up like strangling him in a bathtub or something like that. He died in kind of a weird way, but he was a tyrant. So back to where we were, it says, as historian Greg Dougherty writes, sanity was never Commodus' strong suit, and he seems to have become ever more divorced from reality as his rule went on. Yeah, that could be a problem too. So the investiture of Commodus to the emperorship of Rome is conventionally seen to mark the beginning of the end. In the view of the Greek Roman historian Cassius Dio, his accession in AD 180 marked the descent of Rome from a kingdom of gold to one of rust and iron. That still lasted for another, what is that, 200, or actually almost 300 years, 296 years beyond that. But yeah, that was pretty rough. If you go through the history of Rome, it was like there's some years where it's like, oh, how many emperors did we have this year? Mhm. And then interspersed with guys that were actually pretty good, like Constantine the Great or Aurelian and some other guys in there. But a lot of guys that were just like, were douche nozzles. So it says the United States today languishes under the authoritarian rule of a cognitively challenged president, a vice president no one takes seriously, a Democrat party got off the rails, a commodian Senate, the political subversion of the national media, and the weaponization of virtually all state agencies. It has become obvious that the Potomac has also been crossed, an unstable commander is in power, a despotic government has turned against its own citizens, and the nation has precipitously declined from gold to rust and iron. No tyranny is more cruel, writes the great philosopher Baron de Montesquieu, than the one practiced in the shadow of the laws and under color of justice. So it says, as noted at the beginning of the article, innumerable books have been written on the fall of Rome, and more recently, several dealing with the prophetic relation of Rome to present day America. Yeah, there's a lot of books there that are linked everywhere up here that I'm probably going to go back and check out at some point. I'm definitely going to keep this article handy. And the links, of course, would be on the link to this article in the description below. And I'd suggest checking them out because you can learn something from history, folks. It says, but the mirror that reflects the current state of affairs, excuse me, most disturbingly was crafted and polished 2 millennia ago at the time of Nero's immiserating reign. Petronius's Satyricon furnishes a detailed panorama of Roman society, its Baroque excesses, moral decadence, and the widening chasm between the wealth of a few and the growing drudgery of the many. Replete with scenes of vagabondage, sexual depravity, political irresponsibility, an underworld of professional hustlers, and a manumitted asylum of ostentatious nouveau riche, the book is an entertaining pastiche of the social carousel of the time, composed in the genre known as Manichaean satire. But it also has its grim side, serving as a kind of proleptic and vernacular transcript of what we observe happening on the national stage today. Absent are the picaresque humor and making allowance for the specific determining features of the era. The Satyricon is as contemporary as it gets, foreshadowing the travails, compulsions, and absurdities of the American moment. It's a book that hits home. Might have to read that one too, especially if it's something from like almost 2,000 years ago. Just be interesting to read something from that far back and just see what society was like then. Does Can America Survive Its Own Satyricon? Colin Murphy's excellent Are We Rome? The Fall of an Empire and the Fate of America argues that the parallels between America and Rome are uncannily salient, and that unless we can somehow initiate a course correction, Rome's destiny may well be ours. Wonderful, but thankfully we don't have barbarian tribes knocking at the door, trying to get in all the time. I'm not talking about illegal immigrants. I'm talking about just like actual barbarians. Murphy believes, however, that revival is possible because America is very consciously a constant work in progress, politically, technologically, and economically mobile as Rome, agrarian and pre-industrial, was not. America has lived through more social transformation in a few centuries, he writes, than Rome did in a millennium. This is intended as a positive assessment. One might also say that America has lived through the more change and upheaval in 2 or 3 electoral cycles than Rome did in centuries, but not necessarily for the better. Murphy's book was published in 2007 before Obama, Biden, and the national crime syndicate known as the Democrat Party clamped its dead hand upon the nation. And the historical concordance between Rome and America set in stone, we're on the brink of losing our home. The question, like the Overton window, remains only partially open. And the author gives some debt of gratitude there. And it says The Decline and Fall of Rome Part 2 will be published on Sunday, October 1st. So that would be tomorrow from when I'm recording this, because again, it is September 30th. And I will record that video tomorrow and post it the day after this video goes up. So, what do you guys think about this? At the time you're listening to this, you can put your comments in there. But again, there will be another video tomorrow uh, with the part two of the Decline and Fall of Home. Did I just say Rome? Decline and Fall of Home. That's what I meant to say. So let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and maybe if you haven't listened to the second video yet, what are you expecting to hear there? Yeah, I find this stuff really interesting. Historical parallels. Rome is one of my favorite parts of history as well to read into. So yeah, this kind of stuff I'd be very interested in seeing. So let me know what you think in those comments below. Thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.